Good morning and welcome to this week's Learn with Lorna. So, welcome, we are on episode 141 and we're looking at further stories of women in the Caithness collections. I hope you can hear me clearly. I know we've had some issues with that in the past, and also you'll see that I'm in a different background because I'm working actually at work today as opposed to in my office at home. So, totally different background, totally different tech setup. So, I'm hoping everything is coming through clearly. So, welcome to this week's Learn with Lorna. If you haven't watched before, my name is Lorna Steele McGinn. I'm the Community Engagement Officer with the Highland Archive Service. The Highland Archive Service looks after the historic documents relating to the Highlands and some of the islands of Scotland. And we have 4 archive centres. We have one in Inverness, one in Portree, one in Fort William, and one in Wick. This series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer, and High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland. There's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of talks, but if you're able to donate towards our work, then we're really grateful for that. There's a link to be able to do so, whether you're watching live on Facebook or whether you're watching subsequently on YouTube. And a reminder that you can see all the previous 140 episodes of Learn with Lorna on the High Life Highland YouTube channel. So this week we are continuing our theme of looking at the stories of women in the Highland Archive Service collections, as it's Women's History Month. And we're looking again at further stories of women in the Caithness collections. We have a physical exhibition going on in Nucleus, our Caithness archive at the moment. A physical exhibition of documents relating to women. So some of the stories that I'm going to tell you today are represented in that. So if you're able to get along to see that, then please do. There will also be women I've spoken about previously, like Hetty Munro, Christina Keith, the Herring Girls, and various others. So if you're able to get to Wick to have a look at that exhibition, then please do so, or look at the Facebook page as well. Now, I've done a previous Learn with Lorna on women in the Caithness collections, number 105, in March 2022. But this one is because of all the um, additional stories that the team at Nucleus have been looking at. And as last time, I need to particularly thank the team in Nucleus because Jen and Anne and Val have all picked different stories for me to share. So I wanted to start by looking at 2 writers, one that was highlighted by Val and one that was highlighted by Anne. So Val chose the editor, Bet McArdle. Bet was born in Ayrshire in the 1930s, and she spent some years, first of all, at the Glasgow School of Art, and then living in the famously artistic town of St Ives in Cornwall. And it's clear that that passion that she had for the arts, and the arts in their broadest sense, remained with her all of her life. So interesting, starting out in Ayrshire and Glasgow, then going right to the south of the UK to Cornwall. But then after leaving Cornwall, she came all the way back up with her family, past Glasgow, past Ayrshire, and all the way up to the other end of the country to settle in Caithness. And she started her journalism career there in 1975, working for the John O'Groat Journal. She then went on to become the paper's chief reporter and then editor of both the Groat, the John O'Groat Journal, and its sister paper, the Caithness Courier. She was the first female editor within that news group and in the Groat's very, very long history. So already breaking some barriers and doing some new things. She won national awards for her journalism, and eventually she became editor-in-chief of the Highland News Group based in Inverness. So quite a climb up the chain from starting as a journalist, becoming chief reporter, then editor of the Groat, editor of the Caithness Courier, and then on to become editor-in-chief of the whole news group. In addition to this, she continued to contribute to and take part in and support and advocate for arts projects, groups, and organisations. She edited the Merkinch community newsletter in her right up until her 80s. She painted and worked with textiles and glass, and she was central to the formation of the Leith Arts Centre in Caithness, which, if anyone is watching in Caithness, you may well be familiar with the Leith Arts Centre. She did all of this, that job and those hobbies, and I say hobbies as a not in a kind of derogative sense, but in all of those creative skills as well as her work while bringing up 6 children. And she even found time to join High Life Highland's board when it was established in 2011. Bette McArdle died in 2017 at the age of 81. And there are some really lovely tributes to her and to her life, um, describing many of them how supportive she was to young journalists, to new people coming through, to um, anyone who had a passion for the arts and wanted to do something with it, that she was supportive and that she was an exceptional journalist. But I wanted to share with you this little anonymous poem that we hold in our collections, which was written about Bette McArdle. It's called The Editor, and it says before and then after. The last verse is after, and you'll see why. Who in her sanctum sits up late and strives with sentences of weight to set to right affairs of state? The editor, admire her. Who deftly moulds the public thought for money who can never be bought? Who always for the right has fought? The editor, respect her. Who notes what great men do and say and files obituaries away when they shall die to print the next day? The editor, revere her. Who gives us cure for cough and cold, who suffers patiently and long and seldom uses language strong? The editor, don't chide her. Who ignorance must never confess, who knows of all things more or less, and what she doesn't know she sure can guess? The editor, consult her. When youthful talents seek to rise, who views its growth with friendly eyes, its merits quick to recognise? The editor, oh bless her. And then the last verse says, after. Who doth good judgment sadly lack? Who has of taste not even a smack? Who sent my little poem back? The editor, confound her. Which made me smile when Val sent it to me. So that's Bette McArdle, and maybe some of you will remember her, and certainly some of my colleagues here remember her. So that's who Val chose initially. Anne chose another writer, Nancy Nicholson, Mrs. Anne Morton. And there's a link between the two of poetry and writing and words. Nancy grew up on a croft in Sarclip near Wick in the 1940s and 50s. And like like the experiences of so many of us, it was the moments of being told stories, in her case, sitting by a peat fire in the croft, that started a love of reading, of learning, and of story sharing. And you can imagine that's something that I was excited about when I read it. That love of reading and learning and stories took her to Edinburgh University and then on to Murray House, where she pursued a career in teacher training. Unlike Bette McArdle, Nancy Nicholson's work has been broad and diverse. She wrote scripts for the BBC, for BBC Scotland Schools Radio. She served as education officer with Celtic Connections. Um, a real passion for sharing stories wherever she possibly can. In her early 30s, she began singing and playing the melodeon in folk clubs. And really interesting, I was reading something about her that said up until that point she didn't do it because she just was so convinced that she wouldn't be very good at singing and that it wasn't worth trying. But in her early 30s she started singing and playing the melodeon. And that gradually led to her starting to write songs and poetry and stories. And there's a quote that Anne sent me about her that says someone in one of the folk clubs described Nancy as an instant Kaylee, which is not a bad sentence. When Nancy's husband passed away, she retired to Wick, where she continues to write and perform. And we recently took in a collection of Nancy's poems and songs at Nucleus, and they are wonderful. They are funny and moving and emotive and emotional and multi-layered. And again, if anyone is watching who knows Nancy, please do to get in touch with us, because I was really moved by the poems that Anne sent me. And she sent me many because she knew I would be involved in them and enjoy them. But I've picked a couple to share with you. First of all, I wanted to share the one, Who Pays the Piper? And that was written after the Piper Alpha disaster of 1988. I'm writing 1988, I think I've got that year right, where 167 men died when the Piper Alpha oil platform exploded and sank. And I'm absolutely sure many of you will recall the Piper Alpha disaster. And this is a poem that she wrote about that. And it's called Who Pays the Piper? Who pays the piper? Who pays the piper? Who pays the piper? Who calls the tune? Who pays the piper? What is the fee? Flames on the water, death on the sea. And the tune is old, and has always told how the great, brave, and bold they do flourish, and how bravely they gamble with other men's lives, and profit as other men perish. Who pays the piper? And when the tune resounds and is always found, where the ground receives yet another father of dazed and despairing young bairns, or the son of a desolate mother, who pays the piper? And the price is dear for the folk who fear, and who bear the burdens of sorrow, for those who are lost where the graph of the cost meets the graph of rich pickings tomorrow. It's a very emotive poem, and as I say, for those of you that recall Piper Alpha, I'm sure it will be. So some are very emotional like that one, but some of Nancy's are very light-hearted, and I liked this one. Auntie Jean and Auntie Maggie live in Inverness. They are each other's sisters, but you would never guess. For Auntie Jean is soft and smiley, quiet, kind and cuddly, and Auntie Mags is wild and loud, flashy, mad and muddly. Auntie Jean is twinkly and twinkly. When she smiles, her rosy cheeks go crinkly. She stirs her tea with a silver spoon and takes a nap in the afternoon. Auntie Mags is bangly and spangly and likes her earrings dingly and dangly. With high-heeled shoes upon her feet, she whistles loudly in the street. Auntie Jean and Auntie Maggie live in Inverness. They are each other's sisters, but you would never guess. Auntie Jean and Auntie Maggie live in Inverness. They are each other's sisters, but you would never guess. Isn't that just a great one? Written as part, I think, part of a project with children. There's another fantastic one, but I didn't think I would have time to read it to you, but I'll maybe post it up at the end. So we've got creative women represented in our collections, women who can write and who can communicate. Jennifer at Nucleus wanted to focus on a completely different representation of women in the collections, P36, the Wick and Pulteney Town District Nursing Association. This nursing association was formed on the 14th of April 1893 and was affiliated to the Scottish Council of Queen Victoria's Institute for Nurses. It had the aims of providing home nursing and midwifery to the poor for free of charge or via nursing schemes, advocating for public health and midwifery, and training district nurses. And the minute book for the Nursing Association reveals details about the day-to-day running of the service and the people who worked for it, and also the many challenges, as we're well aware today, the many challenges that those who work in healthcare can face. So, for instance, in November 1920, there was a child welfare nurse appointed for Wick, a Miss Webster, but she only stayed for 2 years before retiring. And in something that we would probably recognise today, the town council questioned whether they had the funds to replace her or not. The minutes record that, this is what the minutes say at that point, an agreement had been entered into between the town council and the nursing association that could only be terminated after 6 months' notice had been given on either side, and that some more economical method of carrying on child welfare work might be arrived at by arrangement on both sides. And Jen carried on looking into these minutes to see what happened. And this is what where her research led her. And I'm just going to read to you exactly what Jen sent to me. So there's been a debate about whether they can afford to have a child welfare nurse or not. The committee met to discuss this and agreed that the 6 months' notice would not be necessary, that they would be unable to reduce finances on their end as lodging was provided at a very low rate of 15 shillings, and to try and reduce it further wouldn't be worthwhile. They consulted with Nurse Malcolm, who was willing to assist where she could, but was unable to entirely take on child welfare in addition to her own work, as Nurse Webster already had 200 infants on her register. They sent word to the town council that they would be pleased to meet them, and the medical officer of health as well, to discuss it further. On the 4th of December 1922, a meeting was arranged with the town council to discuss the child welfare nurse position, to be held the following day at the town hall. 8th of January 1923. It was agreed at the meeting that a child welfare nurse was required. Dr. Dick's speech cleared a lot of the confusion the town councillors had, and the Education Authority Finance Committee proposed to pay £60 per annum as their share for the upkeep of a school nurse. The Nursing Association agreed to this and hoped that a new nurse might soon be appointed. In March of 23, Nurse Malcolm retired. She retired as district nurse to take on the duties of town nurse, health visitor for the town, and child welfare nurse. The town council asked that the 15 shilling charge a week for accommodation be reduced to 12 shillings, but the request was refused as it was felt to be absurd. And then in December of 23, the Treasurer noted that the Town Chamberlain had deducted the child welfare nurse's month-long holiday absence from her bill for lodging. The committee resolved to let this go, as the town nurse looked after the district cases during the Queen's nurse's absence on holiday. So we know that the child welfare nurse position continued. Our records only go up to 1948, but we know that in 1953 there were only 2 district nurses in the parish of Wick. So that's the borough of Wick or the town of Wick, but also the surrounding area. And those 2 nurses visited people in their own homes, operated a healthcare centre in Sinclair Terrace. The District Nursing Association also ran a maternity home at Rosebank House for some time, but by 1953 this had been handed over to the hospital board. So it's really interesting. You can get some insights into the challenges of healthcare over the decades. And of course, the continuation of care and compassion can also be seen in other collections, such as the collections we hold about the North Highland Women's Wellness Hub, which is a group that was created in 2021 to address the issue of women's healthcare in the north of Scotland. So again, that's something that's continued to be a challenge. How do you provide the best women's healthcare, the best midwifery care in the north of Scotland? And many of the women who feature in this collection, such as Rebecca Weimer and Kirstine Campbell, have that same aim that the District Nursing Association had, ensuring access to good and equal healthcare in the north, whether that's their full-time job or not. So we've looked at creative women, we've looked at nursing and women in kind of compassionate industries. But I wanted to finish by looking at something that Val chose, which of course I couldn't have finished this without talking about it, and that's women working in Dounreay. Dounreay, as many of you will be more than familiar with if you're anywhere in the Highlands, Dounreay is Caithness's nuclear facility, set up in the 1950s as a site for civil fast breeder reactors. I won't go into the story of Dounreay here at all because I have done that in previous Learn with Lorna, so if you want to look at that, please do so. But it was a huge, huge part of Caithness's story and the economy of Caithness and North Sutherland for decades, and it continues to be an important part of the story of that part of the world. And here's how Val's notes to me opened. Women have worked at Dounreay's experimental fast reactor, albeit in small numbers, from its earliest days. At an open day for the press on the 10th of May 1957, the Bulletin interviewed 3 young women, Scientific Assistant Jean Campbell of Shepster, Assistant Experimental Officer Elizabeth Murray of Thurso, and Liverpool-born Scientific Officer Sylvia Mitchell. The newspaper reported that all 3 told how they were spurning the social whirl of city life to help forge Britain's industrial future on the desolate shores of Caithness. And Val gave me some fantastic notes about 4 different women who've worked at Dounreay over the decades. Isabel Cormack, Gina Mackenzie, Linda Smith, and June Love. And so that's what I'm going to finish by talking about. Isabel Cormack was the clerical officer secretary to the resident engineer at Dounreay for 2 years in the 1950s before leaving to have a family. So she was there in the early days and there for a relatively short period of time. But she remembered those early days on site, working in Nissan huts and taking committee meeting minutes through a fog of cigarette smoke and then having to get up and go and type them all up to circulate. She also recalled the challenges of working on a site that was mostly men. For instance, having to climb the ladders to look at the reactors, to look at the domes and things, having to climb the ladders with all the men around her, because of course she was wearing a skirt. She also recalled living in shared accommodation of 29 men and 2 women and some of the challenges that threw up. So that was Isabel Cormack for quite a short time and in the early days. Gina Mackenzie started to work at Dounreay in 1961 at the age of 19. And when recording an interview about her experiences with James Gunn, who's the heritage officer for Dounreay, she said, "It was with some trepidation that I set out. And after my first day in the typing pool with about 24 other women, I considered never returning. Retiring 41 years later suggests that I more than got over my initial apprehension. She also noted that her sister and her brother both worked at Dounreay, as did both of their spouses. So you really get an idea just from that one person of the huge importance of Dounreay as an industry to Caithness. Her reminiscences will probably be familiar with for anyone who worked in a typing pool civil service type environment in the 1960s and 70s. She explains how she was given training in shorthand and typing to be able to write in shorthand and type as quickly as possible. She progressed to work as a secretarial typist, which she said she much preferred. So, getting out of that crowded typing pool of lots of women and moving on to share an office with one other girl who they were both secretarial typists to directors and people higher up the chain. And she says this: typing has advanced a lot over the years, from manual typewriters with carbon copy paper up to 6 layers, and lots of now Snowflake, I think someone will correct my pronunciation, to electronic typewriters and eventually computers. Budgets were very tight for us. The pencils we used for taking shorthand had to be completely worn down before we could ask for a new one. The days of excess were well into the future. I remember attending a meeting about the paperless office concept in 1990s, but I gather that we are now, even now, nowhere nearer that day. Um, Gina Mackenzie worked in various roles at Dounreay. She worked in the admin team, in the finance team, and in the personnel department, and then in the director's office, where she described gaining more understanding at that point of the technical side of Dounreay's operations and using the Dounreay Charter to visit Risley and also the UK Atomic Energy Authority headquarters in London. She recalls the sheer number of people who came to work at the site in its early days. She says it was a constant sea of new faces. And you may remember when I've talked about Dounreay in the past and the atomics, I've talked about all the people who came from the south, from the rest of Scotland, all over. She says many came on a 2-year contract from England to work at this nuclear site, but then ended up settling and staying in Caithness. As well as the staff coming and going all the time and changing faces all the time, Dina remembers the constant flow of high profile visitors to the site. She recalls Prime Ministers visiting, including Harold Wilson, James Callaghan, Ted Heath, and Margaret Thatcher. And as well as this, she records in her notes a lot of really happy memories about time spent with the Dounreay social activities, so things like concerts and events, and meeting the Hollies who came to play. Before retiring in 2002, she worked in Dounreay's Health and Safety and Environment Department, coordinating responses to items raised in health and safety audits, which she said she really enjoyed. But she didn't retire before receiving an MBE in the 1996 New Year's Honours List for services to the nuclear industry. Her interview finishes like this: I had a long career, and I would probably describe my Dounreay experience as varied, enjoyable, and interesting. The experience was long and diverse, and I met some inspirational people in my time there, and I made many lasting friends. I still keep in touch with many of them, and in fact, I have regular lunchtime get togethers with the local girls I met in the early days and have remained steadfast friends with ever since. In my retirement, I work part time in Thurso's cancer research charity shop 2 days a week, 2 half days a week, enjoy walking, gardening, and now spending time with my family. The final two women that I want to tell you about from the Dounreay perspective both joined in the 1970s. Linda Smith joined the UK Atomic Energy Authority Constabulary at Dounreay in 1977 after serving as a police officer in Wick for 8 years. She undertook specialist training in Harwell, including firearms training. Linda was the third woman to join the force when her starting salary was £2,570. So if anyone, Linda, I'm seeing your comments there. If anyone has got updates on their starting salary in the 1970s, I would be interested to hear that. So she started in 1977 when she was only the third woman to join the force. But within 2 years, women were being specifically targeted for recruitment. Linda stayed with the force for many years, seeing numerous changes. So, for instance, when she started, the priority was to ensure that no unauthorised material left the site. But by the end of her time there, the bigger issue was not letting unauthorised people or material onto the site, which is a really interesting kind of dynamic on the way that our relationship with the nuclear industry has changed. When the force became the Civil Nuclear Constabulary in 2005, in its 50th year, Linda had risen to the rank of inspector. And finally, yes, so she retired after that, but not before. She had gone all the way from being the third woman to join the force to rising up to the rank of inspector. And lastly, I wanted to share with you the story of June Love. June joined Dunray in 1979 as secretarial trainee, rising through the ranks again to become secretary to 2 site directors. In 2000, she joined Dunray's PR department, instrumental in being the person who was the public face of Dunray as it changed from being an operational civil nuclear site to decommissioning. So that really important role of liaising between the industry, the business, and the local population, the local community, because she became a stakeholder and socio-economics manager. So to move up from being secretarial trainee, secretary to 2 site directors, PR department, and then stakeholder and socio-economic manager. So that a real change in a real variety in roles. In June 2022, so bringing us right up to date, in June 2022, June was awarded the MBE in the Platinum Jubilee Honours List for services to the nuclear industry and to the community of Caithness and North Sutherland. She had coordinated during COVID the support between the NHS and local community groups. And if that wasn't enough, she also, in her spare time, became the first ever female president of the Magic Circle. It's extraordinary. I like reading about all these things that people are doing at work, but then the things they're also doing in their spare time. June retired in October 2022 after over 40 years at Dunray. So we've looked at some extraordinary women, some poets, writers, nurses, secretaries, award winners, people in PR, people in winning MBEs and awards. So I hope you've enjoyed that. And if I've looked slightly distracted in the last second or two, last minute, it's because I've been going through all my folders to open up a poem to share with you, because I think I've just got time to share with you one more of Nancy Nicholson's poems, which sums up some of the challenges, maybe, that women have faced in the workplace. It's called They Sent a Woman. I sent for the doctor. I telephoned today. The doctor was an awful time coming. I sent for the doctor, but sorry to say, a doctor never came. They sent a woman. But I let her make me better, and I asked her if she could not get into nursing. I sent for the doctor, but when she went away, I couldn't understand why she was cursing. I sent for a pilot. I telephoned today. The pilot was an awful time in coming. I sent for the pilot, but sorry to say, a pilot never came. They sent a woman. And she roared off and she soared off and she came in and made a perfect landing. But why she wouldn't just have been an air hostess, I've got to say, is past my understanding. I sent for the Polis. I telephoned today. The Polis was an awful time coming. I sent for the Polis, but sorry to say, the Polis never came. They sent a woman. But she nabbed the boys that grabbed the payroll from the office in the high street. But still, I felt she should be telt that's no a lassie's job. I wouldn't want her on the beat in my street. I sent for a farmer. I telephoned today. The farmer was an awful time coming. I sent for a farmer, but sorry to say, a farmer never came. They sent a woman. Isn't that just a brilliant thing to end on? So I hope you've enjoyed sharing some of these stories with me, learning about some of the women who have made the story of Caithness. I hope you can join me next week. Next week, I will be talking about the life and the journals of Lady Constance Astley, a collection held in our Lochaber Archive Centre. So Rory has been helping me put together some notes for that one. So thank you again to the team in Wick for their thoughts and suggestions and notes for this week. As I say, if you're in Caithness or nearby, you can get into Nucleus to have a look at their physical exhibition about some of these women, then please do that. A reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer, that High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and that there is no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of events. But if you're able to donate towards our work to help us continue to do the different things that we do, then we would be very, very grateful for that. Thank you. And thank you, Linda. I'm glad you loved the poems. I did too. They made me well up and they made me laugh. Thank you.